It's the old adage, pardon my French, crap in, crap out, right? The USDA has different meat gradings. Those are select, choice, and prime. And then they also have subvariants, upper 2/3 choice, lower 2/3 prime, and the list goes on. Each carcass has its process is graded off the ribeye. It's not graded off the brisket, it's graded off the ribeye, which is the most expensive cut on the carcass. And it all has to do with the amount of intermuscular fat and intramuscular fat on each cut of meat, meaning the marbling contained within that ribeye. That's where the meat is graded and judged upon. That being said, I like to use upper 2/3 choice or prime. That's what I prefer. And with a brisket, that means generally speaking, you'll have an even fat cap, right? That's the layer of fat on the top of the brisket that will provide really good moisture as the meat cooks. And it's uniform, it's easy to trim, and it just reacts better. And not only that, but the prime brisket would generally have harder fat than a select brisket. So if you look at a select brisket versus a prime, that fat cap on a select brisket will be kind of mushy and soft and inconsistent, whereas prime, it's a little bit more firm and hard and clear as it processes when it cooks. Now, another thing, in respect to knives, I recommend that you get really good knives and take care of them. I've had these knives for about 5 years. These are Wusthof. I use a curved blade knife, such as this. That way I can really get down on a piece of meat, especially in some areas that are a little bit gristly and hard.
Knife, isn't that what
Yes,
you call
ma'am.
that
Yes, ma'am. That's a curved bone knife. And then I also like to use a more thin, flexible fillet knife. So I use this one to trim the outside edges of a brisket in some of those harder places, as well as removing the decal fat. It's a little easier for me to get in there and really apply the force that I need and leverage that I need to trim around it. Whereas this rascal here is really nice for lightly shaving off the, yes ma'am. Now speaking of fat, when we trim this rascal, we are going to reserve the fat. And I'm going to cut it up, I'm going to put it in a foil pan, and I'm going to render it on the pit. And the reason why I do that is because I wrap my meat when it gets to a certain stage. But what I do with the paper is I take that rendered fat and I wet the paper down with that rendered fat and then wrap the brisket up in it. Mm-hmm. What that rendered fat does is it seals the paper. It's a weird thing about paper, especially butcher paper, the peach paper, not the white paper, but the peach paper, is it still allows the air to flow through that paper, but the grease actually seals it and retains the moisture, but it also adds the fifth dimension, which is more beefy flavor. Weird.
Wow, that's cool.
Unlined paper if you didn't pay.
I buy my paper Amazon.
Yeah, but if you're not careful, you'll get lined by it, and you don't want to use it. I only discovered the paper thing, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago or a year ago or something, man. That honestly makes a world of difference to me. It's to wrap it in oil. Yeah, you just don't get the although I didn't know your trick about the saturating the paper with fat.
That's a little known trick.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
It ends up that way if you don't do it, but still, it's starting out.
And sort of with that saturated fat, that makes for a lot. Lends to your tender when you start your fire.
Now, I got a select brisket, okay? Because, well, my supplier didn't have any primes. But this is a really good one.
So
and the reason why I know that it's good is I did a couple things when I was examining this rascal. I like the size of it. A lot of people will say, I only like to cook ones that are 6 pounds or 5 pounds or so on and so on. I've never really been able to tell the difference between a 6 pound and a 10 pound brisket in respect to the way that it cooks. Some people swear they can. I can't. You know, it all has to do with how you trim it, how you season it, and how you cook it. How you treat it at this stage determines its outcome on the backside of that cook. And the smallest of details count. So I'll show you how to trim this rascal that will make it cook good. Okay? So I just turn this rascal over. In this one here, you'll notice that the fat cap is uniform. I don't have any holes or gouges. Sometimes you'll get these rascals. You know, they're processing animals. I know that the plant up in Lawrence, Kansas, the IBP plant, they will process 1,500 head of animals per shift, and they're running 3 shifts. Think about that.
And they send all the briskets to Texas.
So the point I'm trying to make is they're not thinking of us whenever it comes to how the brisket looks. They're just trying to get the process through as quickly as they can, because minutes count in that business.
Yeah.
The longer it takes them to process, the more it's costing them. So they're oh boy, they're really moving it. So with that being said, this one doesn't have any gouges on that fat cap. It's uniform from here to here, from point to point. You'll see that? Mm-hmm. And then I take a look at it from here. And what I'm looking for is I'm trying to get to as thick of a piece of meat from this point to this point on the flat. Not all the time I can do that. This was the best one that I had available to me at the point. It's still a little bit thin on this side, but we'll rectify that whenever we're trimming. Okay?
So you want the same thickness throughout the whip?
If I can. Or as uniform as I possibly can anyway. Yes, ma'am. And then I'll flip it over and I'll take a look and see what the striations of fat look like through this area specifically. I already know there's a good amount of fat in this area here. I know that there is, because that's the point. But I'm looking for as good as striations of fat that are running through this piece of meat here. This is the decal. So when you're looking at it, who knows where this is located on the animal? Anyone know?
Where's the brisket?
I think it's
Yeah.
like right in here, but
Right
I don't
here.
know. Is it?
The chest.
Yes, sir. So if it's on the animal, it looks like this. And there's 2 briskets paired together, one here and one there. They're left and right hand side. And they're right here on the chest. And this is what's called the pectoral hump right here. So it's basically that primal cut in between that 4/4. And this is more or less a working muscle that's supporting the whole weight of that animal, which means that it's going to be pretty tough. And that's the reason why it takes so long to cook it and to render it all out. There's a lot of connective tissue and whatnot inside that rascal. So you have to really kind of be low and slow with it. But there's 2 of these per animal. And this was a big boy right here.
How many pounds is that?
This one's about, I'm going to say this one is about 18 pounds, yeah. So, you want to start out with a piece of meat that's cold. The colder it is, the easier it is to trim.
You know, one thing I think I've noticed, tell me if I'm wrong, but when you're looking at these things, sometimes it's kind of hard to evaluate. And when they're packed like that one is right there, the fat, you know, feels a lot of times, if it's cold enough, the fat feels pretty solid, and so it's It's kind of easy to tell how much, or easier to tell how much fat it's got on it, because it feels really solid. Is that a valid way?
It is a valid way. It is. One thing I can tell you is, the colder that the meat is, the easier it is to trim. So you want to keep it cold, because once that fat cap starts getting cold, and brother, it's difficult to trim. So there's that. So I cut this decal out. Did y'all see how I did that?
Mm-hmm.
I just went around like this and cut that decal out. That's called decal fat. That's like a cushioning fat in between these two pieces of meat. So I exposed that, and now I'm going to take my fillet knife and shave that silver skin off of there. That's no good for nothing. So we'll just take as much of that as we can. We don't have to really geek out and get crazy with it or anything, but we want as much of that off of there as we possibly can. Okay? Now that exposes what I call a seam line. And if y'all can see where I took that decal out, there's a seam. Every brisket's a little bit different, and they all can expose themselves a little bit differently, but y'all kind of see that seam? Mm-hmm. Okay. What I like to do is I like to take this edge off, and that exposes the fat cap where I can see exactly how much I need to trim on that top. But it also takes care of all these little loose and jagged edges which don't cook good. The goal is to get this to cook at the same rate as this, to cook at the same rate as this, to cook at the same rate as this, right? And heat loves jagged edges. If you have a jagged, sharp edge, the heat's going to get attracted here, and it'll start drawing moisture away from here. So we want to get rid of those. But I'm going to clean this brisket up, and I'm going to just take that off of there. Okay? Boom. That's no good for nothing, unless you're making sausage. Okay? There goes $2.50. All right, and I'll just kind of shave that off right there, and we're kind of cleaned up now here. See it? I'll just take the fillet knife, because I like to kind of make things as neat as I can, and shave that off. See how we neaten that up? Flip it over. Now I'll mash on this edge here. Okay, and now I want to expose that. I know that I'm going to trim this. Okay, but before I do that, I'm going to take care of this pectoral hump. There's a lot of connective tissue and cartilage in here that's not really good eats, right? So we'll just take that, and I'll hold it like this, and there it comes. See all this fat and everything in here? That's really good for sausage. Inherently, there's not much wrong with this, but I'm going to end up trimming more of this away on the block than I'm actually going to end up using. So, and the old adage is I'm trying to get it to cook evenly from nose to tail. So there goes $3 and some odd cents.
But you don't render that part either, you just toss it.
Yeah, there's nothing to render in that one, brother. So I will render this though. Okay. I'll clean that up. Now I can come over here where I flattened it out. And now I can determine that I need that out of here. So I'm going to do this and take care of these sharp edges at the same time. So I just kind of get a sight line. And I trim that up. I'll use my good boning knife for that. Kind of hold it.
And you're doing that to even out the, I got it, here you go. Okay.
Alright.
So you saying that just explain to me why though, because I never trim this much, and you know the edges, those rough edges like you're talking about, they do always burn.
Yeah, well, we're gonna rectify
Kind of
them.
good though, but
So now we're left
Is
with.
that not the source of burn ends, or?
Well, actually, the burnt ends are gonna actually come from here to a certain extent here, but predominantly here on this side here.
Gotcha.
So what I do is I take this and I just start shaping the brisket. Now remember, whenever I took that corner off, that seam line, that showed me, now I can see how much fat's on there. You see that, guys?
Yeah.
So now we can see that. So now we can kind of see how much we need to take off. And you just kind of lightly, with your fillet knife, start taking some of that off. I like to kind of run my hand through here. Each brisket's a little different. And I'm not going to go crazy with this one, because I can see that the fat is not running real deep right there. But what I will do is right here.
so how much fat do you leave on it? Just a little bit?
Just a
the
little
top?
bit on the top, roughly about 1/4 of an inch-ish, heavy on the ish. roughly, and then I'll kind of trim over here. Trim some of that hard fat, and this is hard fat underneath here. See how how this fat is harder than this fat. This is all the soft fat.
You like the soft fat?
Soft fat's good for rendering. Hard fat is what I want for sausage. I can't use the soft fat when I'm making sausage, but I can use the hard fat.
Does it just not grind as well?
Well, that's absolutely correct. So what happens is this has a different melting point than this.
Yeah.
This is going to melt faster than this.
Yeah.
Okay?
If you were trying to grind it, I guess that softer stuff would probably just gum up.
It really would. Yes, sir. It sure would. So I'm kind of working it. And looky there what I'm left with. Well, I'll kind of flip it over. And I'll clean up some of these edges. Because I'm a weirdo and I like it to look pretty.
Yeah, but your $3.50 is up to $10 that you trim off.
I know.
And the dog's going, don't forget about me.
But that does look good.
That does look pretty.
Okay. I'm going to quit carving on that. What do y'all think? Questions?
Looks good.
So how does
Comments or
that
concerns?
hard fat look over there now? Let's
Okay,
see. How
right there,
it's
ma'am.
over there.
See how that is? I might take a little bit of that right there. Okay, so that's what we're left with, is something like that. What do y'all think? Questions,
Yeah.
comments, or concerns?
No concerns.
I think you've done this a few times.
Yes, ma'am, I have. Okay, would you hand me one of those bus tubs, please? That's going to be your job today, your bus tub.
I can do that. I can get them apart.
Here, I'll help.
It's good.
That's not a one-person job.
There.
Sometimes they get stuck together. Okay, so now we're going to save that, and then I'll go in and get a full pan. Should have already had it out here, but that's okay. So we'll just get this, and we're going to save this and reserve this on the pit, okay? We're going to do that. Get that rocking.
And that's another thing, those foil pans come in handy. I found myself using a ton of those.
Boy, don't they. Okay, so we've done that. Now, we're going to take our other bus tub. Okay. Put that out there.
You gotta see something else. You need to have a couple of those things. Man.
Yeah. Yep. Boom. Just like that. Huh? So, now, brisket rub. Alright? I know that this says Fiesta Boner brisket rub, but that's not what's in here.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
I wanted to show you what the not proprietary, but what the basic base of this thing is, and that's kosher salt. Kosher salt, I like to use Morton's kosher salt. And the reason why, see how the grains are on that? They're pretty good size. If you're looking under a microscope on that, it'd be real jagged and irregular. But the grain size is as follows. It kind of looks like this. Not all kosher salts exactly alike. If you go to get some from Cisco or maybe even Restaurant Depot, it'll tend to be like a flake. And the flake will melt faster. The melting point is lower than this guy right here, which is a little bit slightly higher. But the irregular shape on the Morton's kosher salt, because it has a little bit of a higher melting point, and because of its rough, irregular, jagged edges under a microscope, means that this is going to do two things. It will create the bark that we want, and will also increase what's called the Maillard effect. So the Maillard effect refers to the salt reacting to the meat and the proteins and the hemoglobins that are in the meat chemically, along with the chemicals that are coming off of that smoked meat or smoke out of the pit. All of those form together to create a smoke ring. So, yep, Maillard effect. So, the rub is and I'll give you a recipe for a good rub. All right, but it's basically kosher salt and black pepper, and not all black peppers are created
That's
alike.
coarse ground pepper. So kosher salt and sea salt are different.
Different,
Absolutely.
totally different, absolutely different. And see the grain side. This is called 16 mesh black pepper, and I get this at Sam's Warehouse. So look at that. See, this says restaurant grind. So what that refers to is the mesh refers to. There's a screen whenever they're grinding pepper. It's like grinding and it's putting it through a screen and it's shaking it. And what comes through the bottom of that screen is the mesh size. And this is what's in the industry known as 16 mesh. And this is also what performs or creates the bark on the brisket. And yeah.
We
So-
see that. How coarse is that?
It's right there. Got it?
Got it. Okay.
Okay. So, in addition to that, and like I said, I'll give you a good recipe for a good rub. So, basically, it's a base of kosher salt and black pepper, all right? And it also has a touch of granulated garlic and Lowry seasoned salt. I don't know what's in that stuff,
So good.
but it's good on, it'd probably be good on wet cardboard. Now, what I like to do is and the reason why I have it in this bottle here is because I like it because it's a shaker, right? And I like to use a shaker of this size with that size hole. Because remember what I told you, how everything you do determines the outcome. So if you get the seasoning on there to the right ratio on this meat and season it evenly, nose to tail, will ensure that you have a good bark formation and this bite tastes the same as this bite. Very important. I guess that's where my restaurant
I was
background
gonna say,
comes
that's
in.
especially
Yeah.
important in a restaurant.
Absolutely, yeah.
I know that at Style Switch, when we were running up there, we were running 5 pits like this, about 80 to 100 briskets a day, 24 hours a day, 6 days a week. So what I like to do is I hold it about this high, right? And I hold the bottle, tilt it like this. And I give it a couple passes, like so, until I get the right amount. Let's shed some light on the subject, by the way. But sorry I didn't do that earlier. Sorry, guys.
No problem.
See how that is? Then I'll press it in. Press it in. Then I get the edges. Not so much worried about pressing those in. Come around. Come on around. And I'll flip it over. Make sure I'm touching up as I go along.
I mean, you're actually going a little lighter on it than I do sometimes, and I have to admit that every once in a while I've gotten too salty.
So if anybody, I'll tell you here in just a second. Alright. There we go. Get it over here. And see how I'm getting that evenly?
Mm-hmm.
Now, brisket, it doesn't matter as much in respect to appearance because it's going to turn black like a meteorite. But the evenness of the application is going to determine how the bark forms. And there we go. Okay? Ta-da!
Beautiful.
What do you think?
Beautiful.
Okay?
Good.
Now, let's go and look at our pit and check out these briskets or loading briskets in any pit. Placement inside the pit is paramount, right? So this particular one, since we only have one brisket, but we're going to put some pork ribs in here later, right? Now remember, this brisket, this pit here, the heat is going to run slightly above and slightly under the grate. That's just how this one is. And I'm going to put this brisket right in the middle because I know that the heat's going to be running predominantly through the middle of it. If I were running more briskets, let's say I had a whole load of briskets, I would put the fat into the brisket towards the heat. And that includes the sides. So what does that mean? All right, this is a fat end and this is a lean end, right? So fat end towards the fire, fat side towards radiational heating. So if I were having to load 3 briskets across this way, I would put this fat edge towards that wall. If I had a right hand brisket, it would be over here towards this wall. And that eliminates this side drying out because it's catching radiational heating. Make sense? So you're going to have direct heat coming in this pit, and you also have radiational heat coming from the metal itself. And that goes back to your question in respect to thickness of steel, because radiational heating actually plays a big part in all of this, and the thicker you can get your steel on that pit, be it in the firebox or the cooking chamber itself, actually determines it becoming an oven and trapping and radiating the heat inward. All right.
Are you using those 2 pieces of wood there to deflect the heat, or are you just trying to dry those out a little bit?
I am trying to deflect the heat rather than just keep blasting on this brisket on its nose. I'm going to put these 2 logs right here because that's just how this pit runs, because of the heat runs through here, and that just kind of protects it and keeps the nose of the brisket happy, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's in there.
Dry wood.